suits. I envisioned you in another suit and Canadian tie today. I guess that was a week and a bit ago, but I missed the suit and tie suits. Is that coming back before football season or what?
Yeah, when we're presenting new ideas for the Canadian Football League, our action plan for the Canadian Football League, I'll wear the Canadian tie and the suit and tie. I believe everything matters. And if you want to take over and be in charge and talk about what you would do, dress the part. So that's why I had the suit on.
I love it. Just as an aside, before we get into some CFL, XFL stuff, does tell me if you don't want to talk about it, but does your CFL deal involve them paying for your clothing?
Yeah, I get sort of a small amount of money to go and I'm at Harry Rosen here in Vancouver, which is my girl that I've gone to see every year for the last 10 probably. So yeah, it's a cool deal, which I wasn't able to cash in on last year.
My contention is that having someone else pay for your clothes is like the best thing a dude could have. I don't have to think about it. They were great. I can spend X on a suit and I don't even have to worry about it because someone else is paying. Made me feel so much better about the whole process.
But did you notice that though, that when you go to look for suits, and I guess it depends on where you go, but when you're going to shop for suits and ties, you all of a sudden go, okay, well, I've got this much money and maybe I'll go get 3 or 4 suits. And then you get one off the rack and you go, oh, or maybe I'll just get one suit.
Wow. You're shopping at Harry Rosen, dude. Yeah, that is a one suit kind of place. But yeah, no, in my regular life, there's no way I'd be paying like $150 for a tie. But if there was one and there was money left in the old clothing budget for being on TV, I wouldn't even think about it. It was just it was an underrated part of being on television in my mind. I loved it.
Got to represent though. You got to represent.
Got to look good, right? And I needed a lot of work to look good. So that's how that worked out. Hey, you were watching, while you were catching the story on 3 Down Nation, one of the partners of Redbird Capital was speaking on a podcast and had some comments that stood out for you.
Yeah, he was on a podcast. His name is Alex Shiner, and he was on a podcast. It was sort of the business of sport was the theme of this podcast. And Alex Shiner has been a former executive with the Browns and the Dallas Cowboys. Is now he's a lawyer, but he's also involved in the executive branch of the Redbird Capital Company. That's the company that's working with the Rock to with the XFL and that deal and Garcia. So I listened to him talk a little bit about the XFL, and I thought it was interesting. First, very impressive guy, and that was the thing that jumped out right away. And I started to think as I listened to this report, first of all, why we have become so hostile and divided on this. This is really interesting when you hear a well-respected lawyer / executive that has got a great background and resume in sports. And you're listening to him, talk about different possibilities, why they like the XFL, what they were thinking. He was saying his philosophy being, you presume that there is a market there for another football leagues in the spring sometimes. And he thinks because of the XFL's ratings on television, that was, he said that there were a lot of people watching on TV. So he said, you can't deny that. And there is a potential for a market there. Now you have to put great expertise in charge of running those leagues. And I'll bring up the example quickly here, DT, of what they have just accomplished across the pond. The Redbird Capital Company has purchased Toulouse FC in Europe. It's a football club in Europe.
In the French top division, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he was describing their sort of philosophy when they went over there to look at this purchase. And it took them 4 years. They examined deeply 80 clubs, exactly what the market looked like in Europe. It was different than the US. So they had to get exactly what they wanted, what they were looking for, what the goal was, what the potential was, what the market size was, who and how the leagues were being run. There was a lot of research done before they pulled the trigger on that deal. And that was sort of 4 years of research. So that's why I thought, these guys are professionals, and this thought that something drastic is going to happen between the CFL and the XFL in the next 8 months to year and a half, I just don't think is anywhere near realistic. I think they're talking, and I'm not sure why it became so hostile that we can't just see what happens from the meetings.
Why did it become hostile? Well, yeah, because of the perception that we're going to have to change everything to conform with the Americans. And I think that probably has a negative effect on much of our lives, right? Much of our entertainment here, we think of, do we name Canadian TV shows when we think of our favorite TV shows? Well, no, because we're bombarded with a million shows from the States. We could very easily lose our identity as Canadians because American entertainment and sports are so very powerful that if we're not careful, we could absolutely fall into that trap.
Yeah, and that's why I'm, fighting for that.
Yeah.
That we all may want to fall on that sword down the road. I mean, that still could be something that we want to fight for, to maintain those traditions and what makes us Canadian, even if it isn't quite as flashy as other businesses or other places around the world. I mean, one of our national animals is the beaver, but that beaver is a family guy. He knows how to build his own house. He is innovative. He is a hard worker, and let's be proud of the beaver.
Yeah.
And, that's one of our Canadian animals. So, I'm just making the analogy based on, the eagle being the U.S.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A little bit more majestic, flashier, but, I'm proud of our North American beaver.
Beaver tails are delicious. Like, you just got so much more going for it than the eagle does. This from Alex Shiner. This was the quote 3 Down Nation pulled out. I think you start from the premise, which seems like a pretty safe premise, that there's more than enough demand for football, American football. The interesting thing about the last iteration of the XFL was how many people watched it. You couldn't argue with that. A ton of people watched it. And I think Alec brings up a real good point that people miss, because XFL 2020 folded so quickly, what with the pandemic. But as I pulled out the ratings, they averaged 2.4 million viewers for their games on Fox and 2.1 million viewers for their games on ABC. Now, those are not anywhere near NFL numbers. NFL numbers are 7+ times higher, but 2.4 million people is not nothing. That's not terrible, really.
No, and Mr. Shiner made the point that it was better than a lot of sports that have been around a long, long time in the interview. And that's a great point. And if you're going to take ratings to sort of judge that market value, then let's look at the Canadian Football League and the ratings that we have in Canada, because they're outstanding. Where a third of the country is watching the championship game at one time or another, over 10 million people. One of the top rated programs, whether it's sports or not, every single year. So, he also at one point, again, this is a very impressive guy, and a guy that clearly has the business acumen, but he contradicted himself in one way. He said that the way we consume sports now, that ratings shouldn't be the only, scale to whether or not a business is successful. He was basically saying that sometimes, people are consuming sports through tablets and phones and a lot of other ways. So we're just taking ratings. So, and then he later in the interview used ratings to say that, you're presuming that there's a market there for another football league. Yeah. And that's what they're doing with the XFL. But, he also mentioned, and this wasn't quoted in Twitter, but he also mentioned that, running an upstart football league is probably the most difficult of all sports, because it's so big, it's so expensive, huge rosters, huge coaching staffs, medical staffs, all of it. So he said, there's also that risk that has to be part of the assessment, and it's about valuation and what they want to invest in and moving forward. And it takes time and research. And I thought it was an interesting interview. And that's why I continue to keep an open mind with these discussions and not go too far off the deep end with it.
And part of what he says, when people say the XFL is a league that's failed twice, I don't know. I don't necessarily get my back up. That's maybe not the way to describe it, but these people didn't fail twice, right? This current group that owns it didn't fail twice. The XFL, in its 1999 Vince McMahon form failed. Yes, sure. 2020 failed. We could talk about how much was declining ratings, no TV money, how much was the pandemic. But this is a new group of folks with money behind them that believe this can work. And I don't know if it's right to put the sins of not even their father, but other people who tried this onto this new group.
No, I don't think that's fair. I agree with you there. I think Mr. Shiner was saying that part of the philosophy here is that you presume that there is a market there, and then you make sure that you have the right expertise running the company or running the business, and turning the business from a hobby, which in sports, you'd be surprised how many owners sort of get into it because they, want to sit in the luxury box and have sort of this hobby.
Yeah.
But he said, you got to turn it into a business. But, if you're going to, it depends on what argument you're making though, DT. If you're making the argument about, the hundreds of millions that is potentially there to invest, well, Vince McMahon had hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, he was in the billions of net worth. And, if you look at the CFL right now, MLSE has plenty of money. So does Bob Young and some of the owners, if they wanted to turn around and just buy the entire league too. So,
yeah,
I think potential money has been there before for the XFL, and it's certainly been behind the CFL in different ways at different times. This is about a different argument that the second half of the equation, and this is what Mr. Shiner was mentioning, the second half of the equation is the expertise that you have running that business is so crucial. And that was part of what they were looking at when they were looking at Toulouse FC in Europe when they purchased them. So, and I think they have an 85% share in there.
Yeah. And I think, did they buy into Fenway Sports and Entertainment, or am I conflating them with LeBron? Because
there was one, I think, deal that didn't work out that was highly publicized, but that wasn't the focus of this this interview. And but it was interesting to hear a businessman that is in charge or partially in charge. I mean, his opinion matters in that group and in that boardroom. When you're trying to make decisions based on investors' money and what's best for the investor, because that's what Redbird Capital is. And so it's not just as simple as, let's buy the CFL and see if we can do something different, or let's take over the CFL and change the rules and all that. I got actually it brought up the question to me, DT, is why has this become so polarizing? And I really just, I think we can look at potential market growth in a lot of different ways without feeling like we're going to give up, our traditions and our downs and our rules. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's partly messaging, messaging that is either there or vacant.
The absence of
from the Canadian Football League.
Yeah. When there's an absence of information, we're going to tend to fill it, right, with our own.
Exactly.
It'll come from our own perception of where things are. If you think the CFL is strong, you're going to come to one conclusion. If you think the CFL is weak, you're going to come to another one. You basically choose your own adventure at that point. And there are some adventurous Twitterers out there on social media. My goodness. It is 5:45. We'll continue with Glenn Suter. We'll talk about Chris Jones signing up with his old high school in Tennessee, and Jackson Jeffcoat of the Bombers feeling he's been left in the dark by the CFL. Is the CFL the one that should be keeping him in the light? We will discuss as we continue on the SportsCage. 5:48 as we continue with Glenn Suter. Chris Jones, Suits, the former Riders and Edmonton coach, named the head coach at his alma mater in Tennessee, South Pittsburgh High School. And I think what a ride it is for coaches at some point, from the CFL to coach of the year in the CFL to the Cleveland Browns to 2 years later coaching in high school. That's a ride.
Yeah, I mean, it's always personal, those decisions, and how far and how deep you want to be in the game. I mean, it's, when you go from the Canadian Football League, and if you're a head coach up here, it's 24/7 basically. You're the first one in. You're up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and you don't leave until midnight or beyond. And in the NFL, it's worse. So, but you've got to believe that Chris Jones made a lot of money throughout the last 4 or 5 years coaching, and hopefully he's all set financially and just maybe wants to take his foot off the gas a little bit and have fun at a different level, which is when you're coaching high school and you're looking at these kids looking up at you with these dreams and stars in their eyes. It's kind of fun to sort of step back and get back to the fundamentals of it.
Could Jones end up back in the CFL someday?
Oh, I think so. I think he's an outstanding coach. I mean, again, he reminds me of one of his mentors, and I played for Don Matthews, the late Don Matthews, and he's often said that he sort of followed in his style. And, Matthews, I think his greatest talent was that he could tell a player's strength and weakness, and he would never really put you in your weakness in a game, in a position, or in a play. And to do that with 12 guys on the field at once is tricky. Yeah. I mean, you can't, and it's not about hiding someone. It's everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And both Chris Jones and Matthews not only got you fired up to play and come out of the tunnel just breathing fire, but they also didn't very often put you in a position that was putting you in a weakness. So I think Chris Jones is that. The only thing I would change with Chris Jones is I'd have a quarterback coach that he trusted and sort of a guy in between the quarterback decision and the quarterback.
I think the quarterback thing, and then maybe have some defensive backs on the practice roster so you're not trying to put receivers there all the time. Hey, Ricky, just go over there and play receiver. Hey, Duran, just go play defensive back for a little bit. Maybe some of that would work too.
Well, and some of that worked and some of it didn't. And, I think if you're going to let your coach go, let him go and experiment with that stuff. But I would put in a structure for Chris Jones where you have a GM, first of all. He doesn't do both. And you have, a quarterback coach that has say on how they're going to manage the quarterback. Because I think at times Coach Jones would treat the quarterback like he would a corner or a receiver or whatever. And it's different. You got to manage it differently from watching all these coaches throughout the year. So, some good there. And I think he could be back, and I think he'd be a championship coach again for sure.
All right. Let's talk about, before we get away, Jackson Jeffcoat. He's the defensive end for the Bombers. Had a tweet over the weekend, which caught my eye. Jeffcoat tweeted, "Do not like the feeling of being left in dark by the CFL about when we'll be reporting or even when they might expect us to report. A ton of us have to tie up loose ends here in the States months in advance before we can head back. I feel like there are a ton of American players who would love to know when their starting date is, because that has to be a long process. And if you have a family and kids, and it would just be that much worse. I don't know if the CFL should be getting 100% of the blame in the situation."
No, I don't think so. I mean, a lot of it for sure. I mean, they can share it with Brian Ramsey and the CFL Players Association, really. I mean, it was a week ago now that apparently, and it was reported that an offer was sort of given to the players and sort of a look at what plan A might look like with a regular start in June. And I haven't, and I know you haven't at this point, and I haven't seen anything anywhere as far as a reply from the CFLPA. So, they've got to be quick on making decisions here as well. And I think the difference is, though, like with Jeffcoat and every player, certainly with me, I know with you, anyone that's invested in the game and whose job depends on it, we are ready to be flexible. All of us. We're ready to have you say something one day and 5 days later or 10 days later have to change your mind or say something different. We're all okay with that as long as we can stay updated. And I'm not putting myself in Jeffcoat's position, but everybody's got to make plans 3, 4, 5 months in advance for sure, especially when you have young kids and you've got to worry about how we're going to take care of them and how we're going to get them to work when mom works and all of those things. These are families that have to stay updated as much as possible. And I think the ball has been dropped there. This is a fight between the variants and the vaccines. There is some good news in that regard, with vaccines ramping up over the next month and a half. They're looking at between 17 million and probably 20 million by the end of May. So if you put together 4 or 5 different plans that would include an on-time start, a start on Canada Day, and maybe even a start mid-August, give it to the PA, get the PA, but keep us all informed. I'd like more. Sorry?
There's a danger in that, though, because when you think of a guy like Jeff Coat, any player who has to come from America or any player who has to move and take up a new residence to go to work, if you tell them a month and a half too early, that's a disaster because they've now paid rent here in essentially 2 spots for 6 weeks. That could be a financial disaster for them. So I feel like the CFL has to be aggravatingly prudent in cases like this.
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're telling them and how, like, what I mean is we all know that we're going to have to be flexible. Like those old rules, well, don't tell them that you're coming to camp in May and then have to change it to the first week in June. That could be, money for someone in rent. That changes now. I mean, we all know that you may have to turn on the fly and you may have to change things up within a few weeks. I mean, the variants are causing problems with the Canucks, as you guys have talked about, and the National Hockey League. That's another whole show. But we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to be ready to sort of move on the fly. And so Jeff Coat just wants to get some guidelines. It could be this. We'll know by then. It could be Plan B. We'll know by here. Just tell us what the meetings are looking like. What does it mean if everyone's vaccinated? What if it means if all the players are vaccinated? There's 1,000 questions that I think every single player, every sort of stakeholder in this game has, and we're all looking for questions with flexibility built in.
Yeah, just as you have to present it right in that case. You have to go, okay, well, maybe, but maybe. And if that, I don't know if that's less frustrating to players, but it would be something you just can't tie yourself to anything right now, right? Like, hey, Glenn, are you and I going to go to the keg for supper 2 weeks from today? Yes. Oh, actually, no, we're not, because Regina is locked down and you can't go inside a restaurant, right? There's so much uncertainty, and I love that players want to get back here and want to play. But to look for a defined answer, you're not going to get it. I like the way you present it of here's the range of things we're considering. Do you guys think these are acceptable as the Players Association? I like that. And if that's not happening, then it should be.
Yeah. Like we'll meet at the keg. We'll have dinner in 2 weeks, but in a week, we're going to update that and we're going to talk to you about, and I'll call you again and make sure that plan is still set.
Yeah.
And then from the last final week, we might have to call and touch base every single day and switch it or push it back. So be alert for all of that. And here are our plans. And here's what the medical professionals in the country are saying. And here's what it looks like down in Texas where they're playing with fans in the stands now, because a lot of those people are vaccinated. Over 200 million people in the U.S. are vaccinated now.
With how the old telephone game plays out on social media, everything that the CFL says or doesn't say is going to get magnified and twisted a little bit. So caution, which may not be what the players are hoping for, but being cautious in their statements is the way they are going to have to continue. Suits 557, we got to let you go. Thanks for being with us once again. Can't wait to give away another jersey of yours on Thursday.
Sounds good. Hey, by the way, on Zoom, I know that listeners can't see it, but on Zoom, I'm always looking to the left because that's where you are. So if you're watching it back on YouTube,
I see.
I'm looking to the left when I'm talking to you because this is all a Zoom thing. I'm still working on. I'm still working on the fine points of where are you looking?
Yeah,
look at the little green dot.
You got to get your monitor, your camera in the same spot, right? I have the same thing. Exactly. You're down here, but I'm looking at you here.
Exactly.
I hope by now everybody understands the Zoom problems that the world is dealing with. Because
I'm getting there. We'll talk on Thursday. Thanks, man.